Hey guys, welcome back to Unlearn with Bianca. This week we are doing something a little bit different. We are going to have a rerun of one of my earliest episodes, rewinding it all the way back to episode 2. There are a lot of new faces here, and while I'm busy behind the scenes creating some new and exciting offerings for you, I wanted to bring this episode back to the top. This episode is all about my story. It's about the journey that led me to do the work I do today. This is a very real, raw, and honest episode where I share with you guys my experience with chronic symptoms and recovering from chronic symptoms, moving through trauma, and really everything that I learned around the brain, the body, and the nervous system that completely changed the way I understood healing. For those of you who have been listening since day one, you may have heard this episode before, but I will say that sometimes things land differently and we hear things differently depending on where we're at in our journey. So it's definitely worth tuning into again. And for those of you that are new here, then welcome. This episode is really going back to the foundation of what I do and why I do it. For me, that is so important in a world where there is just so much information. There's so many voices out there. I really hope that you connect to something and you see yourself in my story. And just a quick heads up with this episode, it is slow. I don't know why I sound so slow. I think I must have put it through some editing software, but I highly recommend you guys putting me on 1.5 speed. And you'll also hear that since then we have enhanced the sound quality. So if you can get past that, it is a very valuable episode. Enjoy the listening. Hey everyone, welcome back to Unlearn with Bianca, episode 2. Okay, so before we get into today's episode, I just wanted to take a moment to thank everyone for their support after my first episode last week. I really pulled that together quickly. Even I was surprised at how fast I got it together. And whenever you as listeners either share the podcast, rate the podcast, it really helps me reach more people and share my message. So thank you guys so much for taking the time to do that. So I was going to release an interview this week, but over the weekend, I actually decided I want to start with a solo episode. So you can learn a little bit more about me and what I've navigated through, how I've moved through it, and why I choose to show up in this space. At the end of this episode, I will wrap up with 5 things that I have learned over the years, and I want you to reflect on how this also applies to your life as well. You know, there is still sometimes a degree of uncomfortability sharing, partly because it just feels weird speaking into a microphone, going into the metaverse, putting my feelings out there like that. Partly because some of the things I'll share about feel like a lifetime ago, and also because I know a lot about the mind-body connection, I'm just conscious of not reactivating other people's neurology and physiology into states that aren't useful. But like I said in the last episode, more recently I've really come to this place of self-acceptance, and I do think the more that we accept and we embrace ourselves, the more we are able to accept and share different parts of our story. And by me sharing, I'm hoping that you will be able to connect some dots in your own story. Like many of us, there have been times in my life where I have really felt like I was the only person feeling some kind of way. Especially when I was going through chronic pain, there were moments where I really thought I was going crazy because nobody talked about anything. And I know that part of the reason why my clients trust me in the work I do today and they get good results themselves is because they know that I know how shit it can be when you're in the midst of struggling with your mental or physical health. Okay, so let's get into it. So where to begin? We'll start all the way back at the beginning. So for me, most of my childhood and my teens, I would say that I was really lucky. I have so much appreciation for my childhood, the environment I grew up in. I have way more appreciation now than when I was younger. And I say that because, as a lot of us know, so many of our beliefs and the way that our nervous system is shaped can come from our younger years. And yes, although we can change that, I know for many, safety and receiving nurture, it's just not a given. So growing up, I was really social, I was really active. I definitely had high expectations of myself, and I like to do really well. I like to have things under control,
And I remember I used to get so nervous about things like exams and tests, which actually makes me laugh because I'm so far from that version of myself now. I guess I was a bit of a people pleaser, and from a really young age, like my teenage years, I was very conscious around what I was eating, how I looked. And I think that's a whole other conversation that I would love to get into with someone on an interview another day, because there's so much to talk about there. It wasn't until I was about 18 that I had my first experience that really, I guess, shook the foundations of safety, both in my environment and just in life in general. And if I look back now and connect the dots, I would say it was an experience that really led me into this direction of work, because it was the start of some really challenging years. So in 2011, it was actually my first day of university. We had a major earthquake in Christchurch, the city that I'm from. And we had had earthquakes before. We had a big one the previous year, but this one was different. And at the time this happened, I was in a parked car very close to, basically outside, the CTV building, which was a building that collapsed. And I'm not going to get into details, but you can only imagine the fear and the shock and the memories that I had from that day. And when I look back now, the crazy thing is it was my first day of uni. I was actually really sick. I had fainted that morning, but I didn't want to miss my first lecture. I was determined to go. That just shows what kind of person I was. I think the fainting was a sign that I probably shouldn't have left, but I missed that cue. Being my stubborn self, I made it to my first lecture, but my friend ended up taking me home because I was falling asleep in the lecture, and we were only in the city for about 15 minutes. That whole day of the earthquake, that whole time period was so surreal. It took me weeks, probably months, before I could really comprehend the experience I'd been through. And it was really hard because, I was lucky. I had so many friends and family that had lost houses. Many people had lost loved ones. But it was a really confusing time at the same time, because apart from my friend, I didn't really know anyone else that had a similar experience. So in that case, I just didn't talk about what I'd been through. And of course, there were just more pressing issues to deal with. And I know that there'll be people tuning in from Christchurch, and I can almost guarantee that everyone will be thinking the same thing. Looking back now, that was a really fucked up time. Our poor nervous systems really went through it. And to give you some context, the ground continued to shake for sort of years to come. And I know from clients, some people that I see, they can even trace back their symptoms and changes in their mental and physical health back to this period or the years after. So that was a huge experience. And a few weeks after, there was this opportunity for me and some friends to go to Adelaide to start our university. And we were going to be over there for about 4 months. At this point, I was just like, get me out of Christchurch. So we ended up going over, and I think there was about 200 of us from the University of Canterbury that went over to Adelaide. That was a very strange time. I don't know if strange is the right word, but there was so much going on. We had just left this crazy situation at home, and we were starting uni, and me being me at the time, I was determined to do well and study hard. So I put that extra pressure on myself. I also had this huge experience, which I sort of just mentally put to the side. On one hand, I was having the time of my life. I was with my friends. We were 18, we were free, we were just drinking and partying, enjoying ourselves, meeting new people. But on the other hand, I felt these feelings that I had never really experienced before. I remember feeling so hyper aware of my surroundings. Anywhere I went, I was really on edge, and we were already living in a high-rise building, so that was hard enough. And at the same time, I felt this sense of dissociation, which now, knowing more about the nervous system, I understand much more about. I remember calling my mum towards the end of the 4 months that we were away, And it was such a clear memory. And I just remember saying, I feel like I am floating outside of my body. I don't really know what's going on. And my friend who I was living with at the time, she also noticed that I was not myself. So at that point, I decided to go and see someone. So the day I went to see someone, just before I went, I remember I was in my psychology lecture, and that day we happened to be learning about anxiety and the signs of anxiety. And I had never heard of anxiety before. Like, this was 2011. I don't think anyone really talked about mental health, but I could associate with every single thing on that list. So I went along to my appointment and I said to this counselor, I think I have anxiety. And that is when she actually told me what I had was post-traumatic stress, and said it was a normal response that could take months or years to move through. Soon after, I returned to Christchurch, and we all just kind of got on with it as best as we could at that time. Me personally, I just wanted to push through. It was the second half of the year, and I really just wanted to start things fresh and put everything behind me, as I was really good at doing. And I do remember in that second half of the year, I was getting sick consistently. So I was getting colds, I was getting flus, I had a few UTIs, but I didn't think too much about it. At the very end of the year, I started experiencing this pelvic pain, and I went to the doctors. Everything looked fine. All the tests were fine. I was put on antibiotics. Nothing changed. And this pain didn't go away. And at the beginning of 2012, I was given the diagnosis of vulvodynia, which is a pelvic pain condition. So let's just say I wrote off 2011. To say I was going through it was a complete understatement. And the next 3 years, 2012 to 2014, 15, I dealt with this ongoing pain. At the start, I was seeing gynecologists, I was seeing urologists, doctors. I tried to see nutritionists, I tried to take supplements. I even had an operation. I went to see physios, but I could never get any answers. And well-intending specialists and practitioners would just kind of all say the same thing. They would say it was really common, that they would see it, but they didn't have any answers, and all the tests were relatively normal. And a lot of people I saw just put it down to nerve pain that I would just have to manage for the rest of my life, that there was no cure. And hearing that itself when you were, 19 is just the most stressful thing. I even remember my hair coming out and I'd get like random skin rashes because I was just dealing with so much emotionally and physically. I tried so many things to get on top of this pain. I was put on amitriptyline, which was an antidepressant that was also used to treat pain. I was trying gabapentin, which was an anticonvulsant that can be used to treat nerve pain, and neither of them did nothing for me. And actually, I used to feel so tired taking this medication that it made my daily life even harder. And every appointment that I would go to, I found that I was losing hope because the news was always the same. And if you know chronic illness, you will know that you can look perfectly fine, but it doesn't mean that you are feeling that way internally. Like if you had seen me, you would have had no clue that I was struggling with pain. I was out every weekend, I was going to uni, I had some genuinely happy moments, but I was also really struggling, and there was this consistent undercurrent of pain that I was dealing with to a degree every day. And I also kept things really private because nobody really talked about things at that age, let alone pelvic pain, which can impact the way you feel about yourself. It impacts your intimate relationships. And honestly, it felt like it impacted every part of my life. It was a really hard time. And at about the 2-year mark, I ended up getting other random aches and pains that would come and go, and tingling and numbness. And at that point, I went to a pain clinic and a neurologist, and I was told that I had something called central sensitization and fibromyalgia. So I was given 2 more diagnoses. And as a side note, I want to make it really clear, I am not saying that the earthquake was the cause of my pain. It's a lot more complex than that. Often there is a physical element, an infection, a virus, an injury, or an emotional threat that can put your nervous system into an alarm state. And in my case, there were a few different things that were going on at the time that I can really see tipped my nervous system into a chronic stress response. So I was in no state to heal. Okay, so at this point, it's about 2014. I'd been having pain for about 3 years. I'd finished my psychology degree and I was doing my master's in business management. I don't actually know how I managed to do that. Somehow I kept going. And towards the end of this year, things started to change in a positive direction. So I went to my first counselling appointment because although I was a very positive person and I was very resilient, things at this point were starting to really affect me mentally. The toll of living with pain was starting to really impact me. And my family suggested that I go and talk to somebody. I went to the appointment and I left feeling very light. And I realized that I had been holding a lot in. And I was told during that appointment that I could get some funded NLP and hypnotherapy sessions for earthquake trauma. I had no idea what NLP was, and I remember looking it up and thinking this looks really weird and strange, but if it's free, I'll give it a shot. So I went to book this appointment, and the practitioner I went to see had 1 more funded hour left for earthquake trauma, and this was about 4 years down the track. So I was very lucky. So I quickly booked that in and went the next day. We did some NLP therapy together to really deal with some of the memories I had and reprogram them in my subconscious. We did some hypnotherapy, and then I started to share about the pain I was experiencing. I remember leaving that session, and for the first time I had felt this sense of hope. I remember feeling different. 2 things had happened. Number 1, I had never felt the sense of peace and relaxation in my body before doing this hypnotherapy. Like, it really put my body into this state of calm after I was focusing on my breath and getting my body into this place of ease. And the second thing that really helped me leave with hope is that she explained how the mind and the body work together, and explained the nervous system in really simple terms. Within that same time period, I'd also heard about this thing called the lightning process, which is what I now teach. And at first when I heard about it, I was really skeptical, but because I started to understand NLP a little bit more, and I knew that it wasn't just kind of pseudoscience, I started looking into the lightning process and the concepts behind it around neuroplasticity and brain retraining. Funnily enough, once I'd heard about it, I heard about it 2 more times in like the following 2 weeks. And that's when I really started looking into it. And when I was doing my research, I started to understand how deeply the mind and the body were connected. But also when it came to the pain, I understood that the brain had a part to play. So eventually I signed up and I went up to Auckland to do the lightning process training. It was over the course of 3 days. And what I learned in those 3 days was more than what I had learned in the previous 3 years. When I left that 3rd day, I just knew that I would be well. And for the months to come, I was committed to putting these tools that I had learned into play. So I did the brain retraining. I used the tools that were based on visualization, self-coaching, posture, movement, a set of mental exercises that I did consistently, just like a training. And within a month, I had reduced all of my pain. That is after over experiencing pain daily for over 3 years. Within a month, I had completely gotten rid of my pain. So afterwards, I just had so many questions go through my mind. Why did I not know that the mind and body were connected, that if I could change the way I was firing pathways in my brain, it would change the way my physiology was responding? Why did nobody ask me what was going on for me before I got symptoms? And why did this take so long for me to stumble across? Okay, so at this point, I'm back on track. It's the end of 2014. I've finished my master's in business management. I decided over the summer that I would go bartending for a little bit because, I was just ready to have some fun again and live my life. And then in the new year, I got a new job in a business role, which was a really good role for someone who had just come out of uni. I got into a really good relationship, and it was around the year point where I started getting this feeling. You know that feeling that you start to get that unease or anxiety when something doesn't feel quite right. I started feeling this unease in the job I was in. I was showing up at work every day, but I knew that I shouldn't be there, that it was not what I was meant to be doing. And I believe that we always know. We all do this though. We sit in things until they become slightly uncomfortable, and then it becomes more uncomfortable, and then very uncomfortable, and then you're forced to do something, but it just feels so scary to change. I was craving so much more, but I wasn't fully at the point of admitting that, and I feel like I was trying to fit into this box that I had sort of outgrown, or that I never should have been in to start with. And there was this part of me like, just be happy, For me, it was never about comparing myself to what was expected of me from others, but I had this more this thing around like, I studied business, I studied psychology, I spent all of my money on that degree, so I just have to stick it out. And I thought, well, maybe this is just what it's like. Like, no one's fully happy in their job. So I just kept sticking it out. And about the same time, I started reading more in the personal development world because I'd had this realization and this experience about how powerful we can be and how much influence that we have over our health. It's kind of like I was living this secret double life. And I remember reading The Mind Over Medicine by Lisa Rankin. And in that moment, I just knew I have to work in this field. Everything I read in that book, it just really lit me up. I was in this between space for about a year, and I even got a few symptoms back at this point. And who knows, maybe it was my body forcing me to move out of my comfort zone. But I briefly started getting back into my brain retraining, the lightning process. I got into EFT. I tried some kinesiology, and I was consistent with yoga. And the symptoms then shifted quite quickly. I got back on track. But at that point, I decided you are either going to be unhappy and stay here for another year where nothing is going to change, or you need to make a courageous decision, build your self-trust, and make a jump. So I did. Me and my partner at the time, we decided to move to London, and I just decided I am going to follow my passion, and I'm going to have to let go of this preconceived idea of what boxes to tick and what kind of work I should be doing with my life, which was purely a label and an expectation I had put on myself. So it was early 2017 when I moved to London, and let me tell you, London was my thriving era. I just grew in every single area. I ended up studying the coaching and the hypnotherapy, NLP. I was working full time. I was able to go to talks and seminars and workshops for people whose books I had read. I was traveling a lot, and I had just learnt so much by meeting people and witnessing other cultures and how people lived. If anyone is listening and they're thinking, should I travel? Just do it. It was the most empowering, eye-opening time of my life. So it was in London I really started to change the relationship that I had with food and exercise, because up until that point, I still feel like I was quite restrictive and I would limit myself to enjoying certain things. So I came off the pill, and after that, I really started to educate myself and prioritize my health and understanding my hormones and what worked best for me in a balanced way. And I learned how to fuel my body properly. I got to this place within where I was just so content for the first time within myself in this area. And because I was studying a lot around personal development as well, I really transformed the relationship I had with myself, my inner dialogue, and I became a lot more compassionate with myself. I'd never really seen myself as a consistent person in the past, but at this point, this is where I really started to practice consistency of habits, and I learned the power of focused intention and action, and really started to see the shifts internally and externally in my life. These were some of my favorite years, and I met some of the best people and had so much fun. If you're still with me at this point, well done, because this is a long story and I'm really just telling it as I go. So I've probably left a lot of details out. So I came back to Christchurch in the middle of 2019 after my visa had run out. I was starting neurospark. I wasn't quite sure where I was going to live next, but little did I know that I was about to soon face some of the most painful and challenging years of my life. So one of the hardest days of my life, if not the hardest day, was in November of 2019 when I found out that my mum had stage 4 cancer. She had always kept so healthy, so this was a huge shock to everyone. And my mum, for me, she was not just my mum. She was my best friend. We had a very unique relationship. Sometimes I felt like she was my sister. Sometimes she was my mum. Sometimes I felt like I was her mum. She was my best friend. I was so close to my mum, and I could not comprehend the prospect of her potentially only having months with us, and I couldn't comprehend the path that my family was about to be on. I don't know how I made it through that period. Like, to put it straight, I don't know how I made it through the rest of the year. I stumbled through. I had that news to process about my mum. I was also going through heartbreak, and the stability that I knew, it just felt like it had been ripped up from underneath me. It was a complete haze, and I'm telling you this because these moments are like perfect storm moments. Like, we will all go through these moments, and they are our biggest catalysts for growth. When it feels like everything is just happening at once, even though at the time you're like, what the fuck is going on? I cannot handle anymore. Somehow you do get through. And this whole period taught me how to focus on one day at a time, 1 week at a time. And at that point, my only motto was just like, Spirit God, take the wheel. I was home with my family for the next 20 months while my mum was doing chemo. I was helping her with some of the holistic things, so ozone therapy, getting a sauna sorted, coaching and emotional coaching, and all sorts of things that she did along her journey. So I really saw all sides of the cancer journey, and I guess the way that we deal with cancer too. And I think it will take me a very long time to reflect on that period, because there is no doubt on my mind that a lot of these holistic things that she did had a really positive impact on her health alongside the chemo. But yeah, it's only been 2 years, so this is still very much a time that I am learning to integrate. One thing though that I have so much gratitude for was being able to be with my mum right up until the time she transitioned, basically every step of the way, every day for that period. It is something that I am very grateful for. Unless you have been through deep grief of any kind, it's really hard to explain the emotions that you go through and the haze that you can experience in the time after you lose someone. but I learned so many lessons and everything was put into perspective. I have this new sense of gratitude that I just never used to have. The things that used to bother me, they just don't anymore. And I'm so much more mindful of where my energy is going. And although the grief is there every day, it comes at different levels. And I know that all of the work I had done on myself beforehand had really helped me to have some tools to navigate through this journey. I've really learned more around self-trust and patience, which I've come so far with, and how important it is for me to put myself first before I can help others. That's really what I learned in the last few years. And grief has really brought me back to simplicity. Like, I have spent the last few years recalibrating, I guess is a nice way to put it. I'm now focusing on new business offerings and making some more decisive decisions that I just wasn't ready to make a year ago. And I am looking forward to what is to come. Like, at this point, guys, I am not settling for anything less. And you shouldn't either, because life is too short and it's here to be enjoyed, and we are here to lead fulfilling lives. So that is where I'm at. And let me tell you, and I'm sure you've gathered, there have been some ups and downs. And like I said at the start, I really hope my story has given you some inspiration, or you've connected to some things that I've said. We always see these perfect images on Instagram, and sometimes I'm guilty of that as well, but a lot of people don't share the reality of life in general, or what it actually takes to change, or what phases people go through. I said at the start, I want to finish on 5 things that I have learned over the years. I will leave you with these, and I'd love for you to reflect on them. So number 1 is health and well-being is holistic. There are so many things that I believe, need to change collectively in the way that we approach our health. But our health always consists of our physical health, our emotional health, our mental health, our spiritual health, and our relational health. And I would also include our energetic health. So there are so many things. So if you are moving through health issues, take a look at the bigger picture, and that will really help. Number 2 is nobody is going to do the work for us. We have to take responsibility for our own health and happiness. So stop seeking permission from others to do what you need to do for yourself, and really be mindful about your beliefs and what people project onto you, because our beliefs are so important, and they can either limit us or kind of drive us in the right direction. Number 3 is focus on what you can control. There are so many things we cannot control. And if you struggle with this, really write down on one side of a page what you can control, and on the other side of the page what you can't control. So you make it really clear for yourself. We have to be so mindful of where we focus our energy, because our thoughts create our reality. And so often we are focusing on things that we cannot control. I want to remind you that you have the power to choose what meaning you give any experience you go through in life. You can acknowledge it, but it doesn't mean that it has to become your full identity. Number 4, you are strong enough to go through anything that you are faced with. And in everything we go through, there is something in there that we need to learn. Sometimes it's a lesson in patience. I've had many lessons around that. Sometimes it's a lesson in realignment, a lesson in empathy, or a lesson in perseverance. But if we can take the lesson, then we continue to grow. And finally, number 5, it is better to be disliked for being authentic than it is to be dishonest with yourself and others. So learn to trust yourself first before anyone else. That is the most important thing. So that's it. 5 things that I have learned that I want to leave you with. And as we're wrapping up today's episode, I really just again wanted to say thank you for being here. I would love to hear your reflections and what you have taken from this episode. Please also follow, leave a review, share this podcast with your loved ones or anyone that you think needs to hear this. Until then, I hope you have an amazing week, and I look forward to chatting in the next episode.